What's going on, you guys, and welcome back to the channel. First of all, before I start, I just want to give a big shout out and a big thank you for everyone who's been supporting this channel, who's been hitting that subscribe button, the like button, and also commenting, as we've now hit the 1,000 subscriber milestone. So big thank you. I'm really hyped. I'm really excited for more content that I've got prepared for you guys, and hopefully more uploads on a much more regular basis. But yeah, so in this video, we're going to be looking at FastAPI with Docker and PostgreSQL. So to actually begin, or before we begin, there are two things that you'll need to download if you want to follow along with this tutorial. The first one is PostgreSQL, and that you can find on the PostgreSQL downloads page. So postgresql.org/downloads. And there you'll find the right distribution or package for your operating system, so Linux, macOS, Windows. The second thing is to have Docker installed, and you can go to docs.docker.com/getDocker. So this thing here, I'll put those in the link down below in the description below. But you'll find the distribution for Mac, for Windows, and Linux. So yeah, I'm not going to go through all this through the installation process, as first of all, it'd vary if you were on a Windows system, as I'm on a Mac. So yeah, it may not be that helpful for someone on Windows. But yeah, the installation for both is pretty smooth. But yeah, once you have both of those two things downloaded, PostgreSQL, and that's needed more for our FastAPI application in order for it to communicate with the Postgres database, less so for the database itself, and you'll see that later on in the video. And yeah, Docker is a pretty easy one to download and install. So once you have both of those installed, the first thing we're going to do is actually create our Docker container. So our Postgres Docker container, this will just host our database. And first of all, just to ensure that you have Docker installed, you can just do docker-v, and you'll see the version that you installed. Maybe not the same version as me, but most likely either this or one in the future. So yeah, let's get started with creating our container. So the first thing to do is, I'm just going to clear this, but you want to pull Docker Postgres, so Docker pull, and then Postgres :Alpine. So just like a minimal version of Postgres. Hit enter and you'll have it. And then to see what you have installed, you can just do Docker images. And yeah, I have a few others like Ubuntu, etc. But you have, this is the one that you want. Okay, so I'm just going to clear that. The next thing is actually to create our container. So to do that, it's a rather long command, so take your time with it and just make sure you have everything written properly. But Docker run and then --name. So the name of our container, I'm going to call this FastAPI Postgres, and then -e, and then you want to set the password. So, and this has to be all in uppercase. So Postgres_password, and then equals, and I'm just going to name it password just for the sake of this tutorial, and then -d, -p, and then the port, so 5432:5432, and then you want to specify what distribution, so Postgres::Alpine. So yeah, take a second to write that down. It's a rather long command, so yeah, don't worry if you may make a few spelling mistakes, just as long as it looks like this in the end. So Docker run --name, the name that you want to give this, I'm leaving up to you, but I'm just going to call it FastAPI-Postgres-e, and then setting the password, the port, so 5432, and that's the typical port Postgres runs on, and then Postgres::Alpine, and then hit enter. And then to see what containers we have, we can just do Docker ps, and this kind of like the size of this has kind of cut this table up a bit, but we have this container here. You can also see what containers you have if you've installed the GUI for Docker, which is this. So I can see here that I have FastAPI-Postgres running, as the color here is green. So yeah, that's the container, and it's up and running as well. But we want to actually create a database out of it. Otherwise, it's pretty much a useless container. So to jump into it, type in Docker. Actually, let me just clear it. So type in Docker and then exec, so exec, which is execute -it, so interactive mode, and then the name, so FastAPI Postgres. So the name you gave your container, and then space, and then bash. So now we're in bash mode inside of our container. You can list it out, see what we have. But we want to jump into Postgres. So type in PSQL-U and then Postgres. And you'll see this Postgres here. Okay, so let's go ahead and create our database. So to do that, we'll say create database and make sure it's spelled properly. So create database, I'm going to call this FastAPI_database. Name it whatever you want. We have this create database. The next is to create a user with a password for this database. And this user we'll need when connecting our FastAPI application with our database. So to do that, it's just create user, and then the name of your user, I'm just going to call it my user, with encrypted password, and then the password itself. So make sure you do this in singular quotes. Double quotes will raise an error. So I'm just going to call it password like that, and then semicolon at the end. So now we have our user. Next thing is to actually give the privileges for our database, our FastAPI_database, to this user, my user. To do that, just type in grant all privileges on database, and then the name of the database, so FastAPI_database, to the name of our user. So we named it my user, and then semicolon at the end. And then you should get this grant in all uppercase there. Cool, so now we can actually jump into our database. So in order to do that, you can do \c and then FastAPI database. And there we go. So we have FastAPI_database. So yeah, that's our database created inside of our container. But what we want to do is actually, like right now it exists only inside this container, but we want to make it accessible outside. So to our FastAPI application, which we'll be writing locally and not in a container. So we'll say PSQL and then -h, and then localhost, and then we want to specify the port, which is 5432, and Postgres. Enter. And yeah, that should now be available outside of this container. And now we can jump into our Python, our FastAPI application. So I've opened up another tab in my terminal, and in this one, I've just created a directory, so the FastAPI-Postgres-Docker, and in here, this is where all the code will live. The code will also be available in the GitHub description, in the GitHub link that I will provide in the description. But to get started, let's create our virtual environment. So Python 3-m and then venv. So create our virtual environment, and then we can see it here with venv. Next, let's activate it. So source venv bin activate, and you should see something to hint towards that you are inside your virtual environment. Now, let me just zoom in a bit more. But the next thing is to actually make the necessary installations. So I'm going to do pip 3 install, and then in double quotes, FastAPI brackets all, like that. For some reason, it complains when I do an installation with square brackets, it complains. So I have to just wrap it around in double quotes. And then SQL, and then alchemy. And then finally, we want the psychopg2-binary. Now it's spelled in kind of a weird way, so it's psychopg2-binary, and this is cutting it a bit, but let me just zoom out a bit. So we want FastAPI, SQL Alchemy, and then psychopg2-binary, and there's another distribution called psychopg2. For some reason, sometimes I have a bit of trouble working with that one, but the dash binary is just another version of it. I'm not really sure how different it is. I guess, I don't know, maybe it's executed or it's compiled down to, I don't know, something binary related, but I'm going to go ahead and use this one and then just hit enter. Give that some time to install. Okay, so now that we have the packages installed, let's go ahead and open up the IDE. So I'm going to use VS Code, and I have it configured so that with code and then period, it will open up within that directory. Enter, and there we go. So yeah, let's get started. First of all, I'm just going to go ahead and change the theme. A lot of you guys ask me what theme I use. I see it seems to be a recurring comment, but to kind of highlight it in this video, I tend to use Noctis High Contrast, this one here, and if you just search that in the extensions, you should be able to find it. So Noctis, maybe Contrast, and I think it's this package. No, this one here. So Noctis High Contrast. This is the one that I use. But yeah, so let's get started with first connecting with our database. Now, first of all, this tutorial is very similar to, or the rest of this tutorial will be very similar to some of the other videos I've done in the past. So my FastAPI with SQL. I kind of had in two minds to just connect it up with FastAPI, but I thought maybe just to go over and create like a very, very basic API with it anyway. So we'll just do that in this one. And yeah, so let's first create our __init _file py. I'm just going to zoom in a bit, but maybe that might be, hopefully this should be okay for you guys. But yeah, next we need our database.py file. I'm just going to close the init file. But in this file, we want a couple things. It's, again, very similar to something I've done in a previous video. But first of all, we want to import SQL Alchemy as _SQL. Next, we want to import declarative from SQL Alchemy.exec, and then declarative as _declarative, and then the ORM. So import SQL Alchemy.orm as _ORM. And yeah, I'm just going to install black. That's just to format the code in a much more readable way. And as soon as that's installed, but yeah, I can just continue, I guess. Just going to shrink that a bit. Okay, so let's first of all create our database URL. So with Postgres, it's quite simple. We just want to say Postgres, I'm going to close that there, PostgreSQL, ;, and then you want to specify your user. And I named mine my user, :password. That was the name of the password. So yeah, whatever you set as your password, put that here. I set mine as just password, so just keep it as that. And then at localhost, and then / the name of your database. Now, I cannot remember correctly what I named it, so I'm just going to go back. I called it FastAPI database. Okay, so in my case, FastAPI database. So that's the, I already had it installed. Maybe it's still installing. Okay, let's click save. Okay, so next we want our engine. So we will say _SQL.create engine, and then we want to pass in the database URL. Next, we want our session local, and this is to create a session for our database with SQL Alchemy _ORM.session maker, and then auto commit set that to false. And then auto flush, we'll set that to false, and you can't see it because of, but yeah, and then finally we want to bind it to our engine. I don't like the fact that it's covering it, but yeah, we want to do this. We want to write auto commit as false. These are the arguments, auto flush as false, and bind engine to the engine that we created. Next, we want to create our base class, and that is just simply doing declarative base. So that's basically connecting up with our database. We can then use this for our models. So, or this base class here as our model for our models. Let's create a new file. We'll call this models.py. It will only contain one model anyway, but let's just make the necessary import. So first we want datetime. This will be one of the types for one of our columns. We'll import it as _DT. Next, we want to import SQL Alchemy as _SQL. And then finally, our database file that we created, so as _database. Okay, so this API is just going to contain some contacts. So someone's name, last name, email, phone number, all that. So we'll say contact, and then _database.base, and then we'll just give it a table name. So __ table name __ contacts, the ID, which is going to be an integer, so _SQL.column, and then we'll say _SQL.integer. I'll stop showing up. I think it's because I'm zoomed in so much, that's why. And then primary key, we'll set that as true, and we'll just set index to true as well. Yep, and then we'll have the first name, and let's just copy this and just change some of the arguments. This will be a string. Primary key will not be true. Index will be true. We'll have the last name, which is the same as the first name, but have it like that. We'll have email, which again is pretty much the same. So we'll set this one as email. We'll have the phone number, which is, again, we'll store that as a string. Yeah, so we have our email. We can just, for kicks, we can just set this to being unique, in that you cannot add another person with the same email. And then phone number, we can also set this as unique equals true, just to spice it up a little bit. And then let's add our date created, as this tends to be a field in most tables. And we can say SQL.column, and then _SQL.datetime. And we can just set the default as default equals _DT.datetime.UTC now. Cool, so that's our model. There's nothing really, special about this model. But now let's go ahead and create our services file. And in that, we'll first go ahead and write our create database function. So to do that, what we need to do is first go ahead and make the necessary imports. So we want the database that we created. So database has _database. And then let's create our function. So _create database. And then what this will do is just return _database.base.metadata.create_all, and we'll bind it with _database.engine. So this will just create our database or bound our models to the database that we already created, as we already created one back here with FastAPI database. So what this is really doing is just, it's not so much creating database, but yeah, updating it or adding our tables in. So we can actually call this add tables. Cool, so now let's actually go ahead and run this. So I'm just gonna clear this terminal. Hopefully you guys can see this all right, but the size should be all right. I'm just gonna increase it a bit and also lift this up. But let's run Python. Let's import services. Actually, before we do that, like go back into services, we also need to import the models. So import models as underscore models. Okay, this is so like this function is aware of this. I'm just going to exit out of this, clear it, and then on Python again. So import services, and then services dot underscore create. Is it not going to autocomplete? Underscore database, and it's called add tables. That's why. So yeah, instead of that, say services dot underscore. Why is it messing around? Services dot underscore add tables, and yeah, so we now have added our contact table to our database. And if you actually go back to the command line, if you still have your Postgres container running, you can actually list out the tables. So we have, if you do backslash and then DT, this will show all the tables that you have. So we have our contacts, and we can just say select all from contacts, and this wants to, yeah, I don't know why that showed up. I don't know what's wrong with my computer today, but yeah, we have the ID, the first name, the last name, the email, phone number, and date created. So that's pretty much it when it comes to just creating our database and adding it to FastAPI. But I'm going to continue with actually building a basic API, just in case you guys are wondering. So I'm just going to close the terminal, zoom out a little bit. And yeah, let's actually get started with creating. So first, let's create our schemas.py file. So schemas.py. And basically what a schema kind of acts as is our pedantic models. They act as kind of like our serializer. So we don't actually write serializers in the kind of traditional sense. You make use of pedantic, which kind of just does it all for us, which is one of the great features of FastAPI. So first we need to import date time, as we need this for our date created field. Oops. As underscore DT. We also want to import pedantic, which comes installed with FastAPI. Okay, let's first create our base class for our contact. So we'll say class underscore base contact, and then underscore pedantic dot base model. We'll have the first name, which is a string. We have the last name, which is a string. We have email, which is a string, a lot of strings. What else do we have? We have the phone number, which we've set as a string as well. So phone underscore number string, and that's pretty much it. So you're probably wondering, why haven't we added ID and the date created? As this is our base contact, other classes will inherit from this. In all cases, for both like posting or updating, we'll always have these four. The ID will not exist if we're creating something, because when we create an object, the ID doesn't exist at that time, at that point, or neither does the date created. And also when we create our put endpoint there as well, we don't want to update stuff like the ID or the date created. These are kind of immutable fields at that point. So we'll first create our contact class. This will be base contact. So when we actually return a contact, we also want to include, as well as these four, we also want to include the ID, which is an integer, and the date created, which is a datetime object. So d_dt.datetime. Next, we can create our create contact pedantic model. And this does nothing, it just inherit. This is just more for naming and clarity. So base contact, and we can just say pass, because when we create, we'll only be adding these elements in. And just to check, first name, last name, email, and phone number. Yep. So that's our schema, not so much schemas. So we can close that. Now I'm just going to close the database and models, because we need now the main.py file. So inside this is where we're going to be writing our API. So the first thing is to import FastAPI as _ FastAPI. We also want to import the ORM, so import, actually better still, what we could do is just import typing. So from typing import type, type checking, and also list. So we'll need that as well. And just here we can just say if type checking, then from from SQL alchemy.orm or from .orm import session, like so. And that's just for typing purposes, it doesn't do anything else. But let's actually create our app. So app equals _FastAPI.FastAPI. Cool. So first, let's create an endpoint that allows us to create a user. So we'll say app.post. We'll say / again, that's showing up, /API / contacts. And the response model we'll have as schema from our schemas. So we need to import schemas. Import schemas as _schemas. Say this schemas dot contact, and then we'll say async and create _contact. This will have the contact that we pass in, and this will be of type create contact. And we also want our DB, so our database session. So ORM, we need to import that from SQL Alchemy, import, or maybe just from import, sorry, SQL Alchemy.orm as _ORM. Dot session. I don't know where I'm going with this. Equals FastAPI.depends, and then _services. We need a function that will get a DB. So this will automatically create a database session. What we want is a function inside our services that will create a database session. So first of all, I'm just going to import services as _services. And in here, we'll say get _DB. This function, of course, does not exist right now, but we'll go ahead and write that. Oops. Pass. So this just formatted it using black, but yeah, that's why you just saw it kind of shift. So inside of services, let's create a new function that will create a database session. We'll say get _DB. And what this will do is a database dot session local. And then we'll say try yield the database. and then finally we want to close it. So whatever the case, always close your database session, never leave them open. So that's our getDB now. Yeah, so let's go ahead and actually write a service function that will create a contact. So back inside of services, let's create an asynchronous function, create contact. This will take in, and we need to import schemas, import schemas as underscore schemas, and our contact will be underscore schemas dot create contact, and the DB is just, I don't know why that imported final, but from typing we can actually import type checking. If type checking, we can say from SQL alchemy.orm import session, like so. And now what this allows us is just to say the, in double quotes, is of type session. It's an interesting way of kind of like adding some form of typing to Python, but this is one way which kind of encourages readability. But the return type for this is just going to be a contact. So what we can do now is, I just say pass and just let that format, but we can now go ahead and create the contact. So contact equals underscore models dot contact, and inside that we can unpack contact dot dict. So that will take the first name, last name, email, all that, and just unpack it and fill it in, rather than us having to specify each argument ourselves, just to help us quicker way of doing it. Then we can say db.add, and then contact. So add contact to our database. We want to commit it. We then want to do db refresh on that contact. And then finally, let's return the schemas.contact.from ORM. So convert this contact into our contact schema back into that. So in main.py, we can now say return await as it's asynchronous, and then services.create contact. We'll pass in our contact as contact and our DB as DB. So yeah, we can actually go ahead and test this out now. So to do that, just open up your terminal, clear all that, and we just zoom in. We can say is Python, or not Python, sorry, UVI corn main colon app dash dash reload, hit enter, get that up and running, and we can now go over to localhost port 8000, and we have our create contact. So let's try it out, fingers crossed, everything works out fine. So let's say the first name is John, and then last name Doe. Give him John at gmail.com. Phone number, just say that. Execute it, and we get an internal server error, and that's because, we don't have ORM mode set to true. This is a good catch, and something I, well, obviously forgot to do. But back in our schemas, we also need to allow from ORM. So this function that we're calling, just zoom out, this from ORM that we're calling here, you have to actually give permission to make that call. So if we go back into contact, in here we'll say we'll create a subclass called config, and in that we'll say ORM mode equals true. This still should have added him into the database, as it basically failed when we did that from ORM. Before all that, we kind of added it. So if we actually go back to our database here, select all, you can see, I'll just zoom out a little bit, you can see that we have John Doe, John at gmail.com, the phone number, date created, all added into the database. So yeah, that part works. Let's actually try it again and get a valid response this time. So if I say something like Jane Doe Jane@gmail.com, execute it, get another internal server error, and this is because the number already exists. So good, the validation's working. Kind of like how my errors are leading to actual checks into what we wrote. It's kind of a good sign. So I'm just going to change the phone number, execute it again, and we have the response body as Jane Doe, Jane@gmail.com, all that. And fortunately not an error this time. So let's actually select all from contacts. And you can see now the ID is now 3 because I think, well, when it ran it the first time, it created the ID of 2, so it just incremented from there. We have ID 3, Jane Doe, email, all that. Cool, so that's our create endpoint. Let's actually just add in the basic CRUD stuff. So next we can do async def and then get contacts. So this will just list out all our contacts. So our read endpoint will have the database session. So we can just take, actually back in main.py, let me just take this here. We can say app.get and then our just API /contacts / the response model will have the list and then schemas dot and then just contact. Yeah, so this will return a list of contacts. We will have now in our get contacts, we'll say db, and then we can probably just say session like that as we have it imported here, just to clean it up a bit. I think as well we can do that there too. And then this database session, we'll just copy this, paste it in here, just to shrink that. And that's pretty much it. We just need the database session for this, as we're not passing any parameters or anything in the body. And then we'll just return await. And now we just need to fill that in. So inside main.py, let's check this bug. So if we go back to services, shrink this, let's create a new function, async, and then get all contacts. This will be a database session, and this will just return a list of schemas contact. And for that, what we need to do is say, just query the database of contacts equals db.query, and then brackets models dot contact and then dot all, and then we can just return list and then map each of our contacts, so schemas contact dot from ORM with the contacts that we got from the database. So we can now, back in main.py, we can call this, we can say services dot get all contacts, and we just need to pass in the database like so. And we're getting, okay, maybe not, maybe we can just, I don't know if this is the case with default arguments, that you can't really use it like that. We can say orm.session like that, and let's just take this and paste it back here, click save. So yeah, let's just keep it as that. Sorry about the circles that I'm leading you guys in for this tutorial. But let's head back to our endpoint. So back into localhost, let's just refresh. We have this new endpoint API contacts, try it out, execute, and we get back a list. So we have John Doe and Jane Doe. So yeah, that's our list endpoint. So now let's go ahead and just add in the other endpoints. So the other one we want is a a detail get, so API /contacts / and then we want to specify the parameter for it. So to do that, all you have to do is put inside of curly brackets name, so contact _ ID / there. The response will be a schemas.contact, and let's just do async get contact db _ orm.session. This will actually, we can just copy this whole thing here, paste that there, and just before that, actually, let's also state the contact _ ID, which will be of type integer. So I'm just going to put pass for now, let that format. But back inside our services, let's create a new function that will get back an individual contact. So we can actually, let's just copy this. We'll say get contact, be a database session, but we also want the contact ID, which is an integer. And inside our query, we can say, instead of all, we can filter the models.contact.id with the ID that we passed in, so contact ID. Then finally, we can just return, in fact, let's just get rid of this thing here. We can just return contact, let's just rename that as well. Cool, so we have our get contact. Now we can actually call it, so return await, and then services.get contact, the contact ID equals contact ID, db equals db. Now let's head back to our API, so back into the browser, and let's actually try this one out. We'll specify the contact ID as being 1, execute, internal server error, lovely. Validation errors for contact, so for some reason, backend get contact. So we're calling, that's because we need to do .first at the end of this. So this get contact, we've got the .first. Don't know where my head's at today, but yeah, now it should work fine. If we now execute it, maybe it fixes it. Yes. So we get back a John who has the ID of 1. Okay. So that's our get contact. Let's just add the last two, which is our delete endpoint and our update. So back inside services. So first we'll just start off here. We'll do delete contact, and we'll pass in the DB session. And just before that, what we can do is just say contact, and we'll actually pass in a contact object rather than an ID, because we'll also be checking to ensure that the contact exists. So here we'll just say models.contact, and this will not return anything, but what we'll do is just say db.delete and then that contact, and then db.commit. Cool, so back in main.py, let's go ahead and write something useful. So app.delete, we'll copy this endpoint, this URL here. We'll say, just paste that in, and then we'll say asynchronous function and delete _ contact. This will have all of this in, so the contact ID, etc. And then here, first of all, the one thing that we want to check is first actually get a contact and see if it exists. So we'll say contact equals await, and then services.get contact. We'll pass in the database session and also the contact ID. We'll then say if Am I getting an error? We're missing a bracket here. And then if contact is none, then we'll raise a HTTP exception, so FastAPI HTTP exception, and we'll say the status code is a 404, and the detail or the message is user does not exist. Cool, and then finally we'll just return or better still, we can actually add that here as well, so we can get contact. Could have done the same thing, but here we'll call await, and then services dot delete contact. We'll pass in the contact that we retrieved if it does exist, and the database session as DB. And then finally we can just say successfully deleted the user. And that's about it. So let's go ahead and just hit refresh on this here. Let's delete something. So let's try it out. Let's delete ID of 1. So I think that's John Doe. Execute, and we get successfully deleted the user. So now if we go back to our database, we only have Jane Doe left. And this check that I wrote in, this contact await thing here, we could actually add that there as well. So back in our get endpoint, we just post that there. And yeah, we can just return the contact as well. I think that should work. If I just go back and just retry that now, in this one, I think we only have 3 now. Execute, and we have Jane Doe. If I gave it a different ID, so something that doesn't exist, we have user does not exist, and the error code of 404. Cool, so that's like our delete endpoint and also our updated get endpoint. Finally, let's create a update one, as that's just completing our cycle of CRUD. So we can say @app.put, and then let's just copy. Actually, we could copy this because the response is going to be the contact. And we'll say asynchronous and update contact. And this will have first of all, the contact ID. So we'll take these two, as we need the database session and the contact ID. And just after that, we'll also need the kind of body of the request. So like all the things that we need to update, the data. So we'll just say contact data. And this will be schemas.create contact. Let's pass for now. And yeah, missing bracket, I guess. Why is this complaining now? I think it's because we positioned this wrong. Maybe if I put it just here. So yeah, as that was a default argument, I think we have to put that there. But we have the contact ID, so the ID of the contact we want to update, the new data, so we can update that contact basically. Okay, so first of all, let's just do the whole check of getting the contact and checking if it exists. Let's just copy this. I put user, I should actually put contact, because that makes more sense. Let's just copy this. And we'll do something similar to what we did with delete. Okay, so now that we have checked to see if the contact exists, we'll create a function inside of services, and this will just update or deal with updating our contact. So we'll say async and then update contact. And here we need the contact data, which is of type schemas.contact or create contact. The contact itself, which is of type models.contact. And then finally the database session. And then here we'll just return the schemas.contact. Let's put pass. Yeah, so let's first say contact. So the actual object in our database, contact.firstName equals contact data.firstName, contact.lastName equals contact data.lastName, contact.email equals contact data.email. What else do we have? We have the phone number equals contact data.phone number. And make sure you have contact underscore data on this side and not actually using the contact. Otherwise, it will just stay the same. An error I fell into when preparing for this. But yeah, so we'll say db commit, so commit all the changes, and then just refresh on this contact object. And then finally, we'll say return schemas.contact.fromORM, and then pass in the contact. Back in main.py, we can then just say return await, and then services dot update contact data equals contact data, contact equals contact, and then db equals db. So yeah, we check to see if our contact exists. If it does exist, we update that contact with the new data that's coming in with contact data. If the contact does not exist, then we just raise an exception. Cool, so let's actually try this out. So what do we know exists? We know like I use the contact of ID 3, so Jane Doe exists. Let's actually give that a shot. So if I just refresh, we now have this put in yellow. And if I try it out, we'll say ID 3. We'll say that first name is Mary, last name is Smith, email mary@gmail.com, phone number, we'll just give it something random. Let's execute it. And now we get back the response, which is Mary Smith. The ID has stayed the same, data created stayed the same. But now if we update our contacts, or if we select from all our contacts in the database, we now see Mary Smith, the emails changed, the phone numbers changed, etc. So that pretty much wraps it up for this video. The code for this will be available in the GitHub repo, and the link is in the description. I have other videos which focuses on FastAPI and SQL again, but also looking at foreign keys, etc. And this is the first Postgres one that I've done. So, but yeah, like the first half of this video is more focused on creating our Postgres database and connecting it with FastAPI. If you're using SQL Alchemy, then it's pretty much smooth sailing and pretty much the same as doing it with SQLite database. But other than that, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I also apologize for the kind of backwards and forwards with some of the errors I made. But yeah, I hope you guys have a great day, and I hope to see you in the next video.